Hi, Paul Farmer. Welcome back to 10 by 6.
Hello, Jason.
You okay? Had a good week?
Yeah, it's been interesting because of the attendance of G7 from leaders all around the world come here to entertain us and actually totally ignore us, but fly over us in helicopters quite a lot.
Yes, it was. I saw the image that was put up, and it showed them all looking into the sky, and it was an interesting image because a lot of people have been playing with that image and that symbolism that they all flew in on jets. They're now all looking at the sky at something that's flying over, and yet they're supposed to be there for curing the climate change ills of planet Earth. And none of them really got it. I mean, obviously the barbecue, the non-social distancing. I mean, that was just a classic example of this out of touch elitism these bunch of people have, and they're almost a complete disrespect that they have for the rest of us.
Yeah. An alien series of beings had come and invaded us. That's exactly what it felt like.
Exactly. And we covered that obviously last week, with your article that you wrote for the Daughter Eye, in relation to lead up to the G7 and the paramilitary status that's sort of overtaken parts of Cornwall. But of course, this week we're going to focus on you, the author. And as you can see behind me, you've recently published a book, Diary in the Plague Year, in which you cover the first 6 weeks of lockdown from late March 2020 into very early May. So can you tell us a little bit about what motivated you to write the book and then obviously publish the book, and what sort of response it's having?
Yeah, it was when it was becoming apparent there actually was going to be a lockdown after this discussion of it, around about the 20th of March last year, and I went for a walk, and I was completely full up with this knowledge that this is going to happen, and this strange thing was going to happen to us, which had never happened to any of us in our lifetimes before. Lockdown, we were going to be locked in our houses, and it just seemed to colour everything that I looked at. This knowledge. I took a photograph of an old pump I found in a little hamlet near the village of Stidians, where I was at the time, and just put it up on Instagram that night actually, and just felt like I had to mark it in some way, and then shared it across to Facebook, and the next day I did it again. I just felt like a need for some kind of ritual, some kind of activity in this, which actually meant something, and actually seizing the opportunity of expressing a really historical time, because it was actually quite overwhelming. I don't know how everyone else felt about it. We still haven't really discussed this, I don't think, enough, but I felt it was in danger of actually overwhelming me. I'm not a kind of sensitive soul in that way, but just this situation, which was so unusual, and which the end of which we did not, and still to an extent don't know. And we've become used to it, but I think at the time this was this really odd thing. But then on the Tuesday, on the 22nd, we had this lockdown, and we weren't supposed to go out apart from this statutory exercise, and this became my way of actually escaping from this kind of constraint, mentally, in kind of like spiritually in a way, just going around on my bike and seeing places, getting an image, taking an image, holding an image, and then commenting on it. It changed as it went through as well. Initially, it was a response to things I found and things I saw, just seen through the lens of lockdown. But increasingly, it became about what this meant, and what the significance of this in the circumstances in which we find ourselves, with this particular group of people in charge, with the history of a very recent general election, which had elected those in the face of the opportunity to have completely different visions, and that we suddenly this group of people who are fundamentally ideologically opposed to institutions like the health service becoming completely dependent on it, and what this meant.
So it sounds to me like it's a cathartic to you as much as anything.
It certainly was my attempt to kind of relieve it by expressing some kind of feeling, and also a kind of growing awareness of suddenly finding yourself in history, You know, this peculiar event was this peculiar situation. I mean, in a village in Cornwall, you know, Stidians is well off the beaten track. It's not got a main road through it. You can't hear any. You really could not hear anything. There was nothing human was getting in the way of just experiencing nature. I would go out on the bikes and I wouldn't see another human being. There would be no evidence of human beings apart from their locked up houses with themselves inside it. If people did catch your eye or anything like that, they might sometimes they turned away. They actually turned away because there was a feeling I shouldn't be interacting. This is against the rules we've set ourselves. And
Yes.
you know, and if you called out hello, they would suddenly respond with kind of ridiculous kind of enthusiasm, just that there was communication and so on. And there are kind of instances of that in the book where it just suddenly come upon someone engaged in some task, and you know, and just this peculiar thing. But it was grabbing history. It was trying to get on, see what does this mean. And then it became about an opportunity in some way, because we're still in this process, you know, ridiculously handled as it's been in some ways, but also heroically handled as it has been in others. And the implications of who were the heroes and who it became apparent we could not live without. Going to a supermarket to do your shop, you know, when you were allowed to, and the people behind the tills in Lidl's, you know, working, risking their health in order to do that. You know, complete reevaluation. We're forgetting. We've got used to it, and we kind of. But I think for me, this is why I'm glad I wrote the book, because it's frozen that time and the strangeness, you know, and the awareness of what's important.
Yes, well, certainly for me, when I read the book, you're absolutely right. It's these two spheres. It's the macro sphere of the politicians, the bureaucrats, and then it's the microsphere of the population, the local population in Cornwall, which we all know is a rural location with a steep history in the tin mining, etc. But you have that colliding of the two, and you talk about in the book, you talk about on page 52 about psychogeography and how you're having to almost reclaim the way in which you interpret and you understand the local surroundings, because of the way in which lockdown has created this isolation and this completely different psychological feel, if you like, for your surroundings. Can you just take us through a little bit of that?
Yeah, it's yeah, psychogeography. This idea that that our surroundings are commodified for us by the kind of capitalist system into making us see our environment in certain commodified ways, and that we can break through that. In this case, it was done for us, because this particular kind of piece of writing was written, outlined on top of Carmarth, which is a kind of pretty high hill, on this ridge of high ground, which divides the north and south of Cornwall. Now you can come to Cornwall and you can go on beaches and you can go and do shopping and so on in the towns, but and never be aware of this. But once there were no cars, and there was not the noise of those roads. So there was, you know, so below you there is the A393, which joins the north and south of Cornwall, from Redruth to Falmouth, which kind of two of the big sort of settlements, and there'll be the A30, which joins us up to the rest of the country, up to the north. The A39, which is kind of one of the busiest roads in Cornwall, which is to the south, which goes between Truro and Falmouth. So it's usually an enormously busy road. Suddenly, that kind of grid has gone, and you're seeing this kind of skeleton of Cornwall instead. And so, yeah, I wrote this kind of reassessment and reevaluation of mapping is psychogeography. It's powerful. It's the opportunity to re-engage your imagination with the place we live and love. It's not just physical exercise we need in lockdown. Yeah, psychogeography, a completely new way of seeing your surroundings, and lockdown made that possible.
Yes. Yeah, and previously in the book, I think on page 48, you talk about coming across somebody out in their car, and the day you nearly died is sort of how we sort of might want to frame it here. Could you just read that extract to the viewers? Because I think it gives that sort of understanding. There you are, out on a walk. You're adjusting to a completely new way of life, if you like, a new way of doing things because of lockdown. You're starting to expect different things, i.e., that there won't be anybody around. There certainly won't be, boy races, if you like, on the local roads. And then suddenly you come across this incident, which is probably quite common in normal times, but certainly, as I said, it wasn't something you'd expect at this point in time. So can you just read that extract and give us a little bit how you experienced it, please?
Yeah. Going north for the turning to Kilvadnac, and suddenly there's traffic. A car pulls out to overtake, and a green Citroen comes around the bend ahead doing 90. The driver stands on the brakes, and the car jumps and bounds completely out of control, narrowly missing the other car, then us. I shout at him, and he stops. A young man who spends too much time eating bad stuff. I tell him my opinion of what he is and what he should do. He decides not to get out of his car after all. He shouts, "What are you doing out? You shouldn't be out." He drives away. And here's where we are. He thinks it's okay to drive as fast as his car allows. And when he loses control, it's someone else's fault because it can't be him. He's armored with indignation. If he killed us, he would convince himself he was morally right. And the morality would be that beamed into our homes every evening following the words, "A message from Her Majesty's government." The ill-framed letter of the law introduced 3 weeks ago is vague and continually modified ad hoc by personal opinion and received wisdom. Vague law is bad law. Does that matter in these circumstances? Well, apparently it does. Ununiformed health care and key workers have had threats and their tyres slashed. There's energy in this knee-jerk nonsense generated by the bizarre civitas of lockdown. It is the rule of the self-righteous, the rule of the indignant, making it up as they go along. It is Johnson Nation. And in a country messed up enough to elect Johnson as its Prime Minister, with journalists of the calibre of the Telegraph's Alison Pearson trying to elevate our Easter risen idiot Premier to saviour status, cut-price vigilantism is certainly a way this might go. How about that for our collective future? And in the news back at home, Dominic Raab tells us he sees positive signs in the struggle against coronavirus. He's making it up as he goes along too. Yeah, things may come and things may go, but the boy racer goes on forever.
Yes, yes, and again, it brings us that clash, doesn't it? The macro versus the micro, the Westminster suits versus the everyday person. And I think also, I don't want to get too heavy here, but it reminds me of the philosopher Roland Barthes. I don't know if you come across Barthes, but he talks about readily, rightly, doesn't he? He talks about how people interpret the messages that are imposed on them from above. And of course, we interpret things in different ways. So the original meaning is often lost quite quickly as we play this sort of Chinese whispers. So you've got two people here. You've got yourself and the driver of the car. Both of you have interpreted the dictum from above in two different ways, because, and many people have argued this over the last however many it is, 16 months, that the narrative from above has been so unclear. It's been so difficult for us. So actually very early on, I think the time that Dominic Cummings went to Specsavers near Durham Castle, at that point, most of the population said, "We're going to do it our way." Yeah. And you make a great reference, I think, later on in the book, when and I'm going to paraphrase, nothing can compare us for a country where the zombies are running the place. And like you said earlier, it was about literally months before lockdown, we voted in this particular government. And it'd be interesting in hindsight whether if people knew what was coming and how it would be managed, whether they would have done. Yeah. I mean, what do you think? Do you think people would still have voted for Boris Johnson and the chaos that his government brought, or do you think they might have actually been brave and gone for something quite different?
I think that I don't think it's ever been so hard to say. I think that what motivates the British at the moment at any one time is so bound up in a kind of resentments and legacies from the past, that it doesn't seem to be subject to a logic. I mean, one of the other things that I talk about in the book is that it seems to be that it's quite possible that for people to hold in their heads the idea that we are absolutely dependent on the health service, and at the same time vote for a government they know will want to destroy it. And but what was I mean, the complication for me was that in the election which had just happened in December 2019, I was actually a Labour candidate for Camborne, Redruth and Hale, and going around being absolutely aware of this, that it did not matter what I did, that this had already been decided by that peculiar, horrible lash up over Brexit, and people's minds are not responding in ways which is predictable or in any way positive. That was the feeling. So I still think we're in that conundrum. I think in a sense, if you gave people the cast iron certainty of some kind of calamity, I think it's still not predictable how they would react. I'd love it to be different. I'd love it, to be in some way for us to believe there is a logic and a spirit. But I think the damage that's been done under the various versions of Thatcherism since the 1980s has destroyed community. This is a really complicated thing in Cornwall, which is completely rests on these small communities. And even here, we've seen that effect going. And so you saw the Brexit vote during the referendum, and so on. This kind of resentment against the framing of certain ways of seeing society, which are actually completely self-destructive. Yeah, long answer to but for me, that's the question.
No, and also I think you imply, and get me wrong, if I'm wrong with this, sorry, please correct me. But you also talk about how this zombification that's taken place at such a high level, it's almost as if the zombies who have the power and are wielding the opportunity to make decisions want us to be zombies too. That is it's almost just their ultimate wish is that we become like them, staggering around, frothing at the mouth, eyes popping out.
That certainly marks the culmination of the zombie apocalypse. Once everyone's a zombie, no issue. Presumably they then start eating each other. I don't know. And zombie here, the undead, the idea, that literally that these are creatures without a soul. Yeah, I think we've just described our current contemporary cabinet.
Yes, yeah. But going back to the book more generally, it's beautifully framed. Yes, it's political. It's a diary. It's telling the tale of, as I say, the first 42 days or whatever it is of the lockdown. But it's you out walking, and it's you. Each page has its own image that you've taken that particular day that you referred to earlier. So it's not just a book of narrative and sort of political discourse. It's very much bringing that political discourse and bringing that experience to you out there on your bike, and what you came up against that particular day, and what it stimulated in your imagination. So, I mean, it's not just people in Cornwall, I think, that can get a lot. I mean, obviously with Dorset, that can get a lot from this book. I think everybody, doesn't matter where they are. And also, I think it might hopefully stimulate them to think about doing similar things. Going back to that psychogeography, to that reinventing, that rethinking, excuse me, their own location and putting it in a context and trying to understand the context so that it does stimulate the imagination to see things differently, and they don't remain stagnant and static. So it's that fluidity that you sort of introduce to our mindset, and hopefully to many a person who reads it.
Yeah. It's really kind of that's something that stayed. That when you kind of you're confined to a certain area, and you think you know it until you start looking at it, and then you suddenly find actually there's a track down there I've never looked at. I assume that goes to there, and suddenly finding well, actually in my case I found two entire valleys within walking distance. Well, I'd no idea that they were there, and they were stunning. I mean, I live in Cornwall, yeah, but it
Yeah.
is true. There's that this is something that can this psychogeography is usually applied to cities, and particularly because you are so heavily steered to consume the city in a certain way. But where you gain in Cornwall is, I think that you've got the matter of distance. Is that I mean, yeah, the kind of cover images are, for me, is, you know, that which people can see already. Which is I've treated that photograph in the way I didn't normally. It's a picture of a village called Crowan, and seen from a place called Black Rock. And the colouring of it is the idea that actually that the vision is completely tainted by the knowledge of coronavirus, and I'm seeing this in a time of lockdown. I'm seeing this in a time of unprecedented crisis, and I don't understand the wider picture. I don't know where we're going, but I do understand this, what I have before me and what it's making me feel. So yeah, this is something that we can, you know, that we kind of can learn from. I think we do need to reinvestigate our places, because they've changed so much. A lot of communities that had a purpose, a very specific defined industrial purpose, don't have that anymore. And who knew where that would go? Well, where it's gone is into the discussions we have now about what things that are called the Red Wall and so on, places that we used to think of as being very politically educated, for example, very proud working class communities, the mining communities and so on, which have now seen their centre go, and need to rediscover what is the purpose of our community now in the 2020s, and in a time of radical change because of coronavirus, but also because we know we're destroying the planet now. And, you know, how do we re-see this in terms of what we need to do with it? You know, these are kind of big questions, which is where it took me in the book. I started off just looking at things and going, oh, you know, there's this, and it made me think this, and I'm safe in that. There's, you know, but it becomes more and more about, you know, where it's going and what we might do with it, and trying to see this as an opportunity and trying to reframe who we are and where we're going.
Yes, brilliant. Thank you, Paul. Can we finish off on a really positive note? Something that I certainly see as positive, and it's on page 70. You have a manifesto of, obviously you're very much critical of the current government in terms of they seem to have no idea, no plan. So you think, well, I'll come up with my own. So can we just finish off with you, if you can just read out the manifesto and really leave a positive message for our viewers?
Yes, so this, as you say, manifesto. Yeah, if they're not doing what you want, tell them what you want, and reframe. If things are not framed in a way that works for you, reframe them. Frame them yourself. Do this. You know. So here's what I came up with in the middle of lockdown. 1, people should have the best possible chance of not dying of viruses or anything else unnecessary. We seem to agree that, as our entire national life is currently predicated on it. How about 2, people should have somewhere to live. So we want to get controversial. Let's try 3. Children should not grow up in poverty, which probably means parents will have to stop living in poverty. Okay with everyone? Right, here we go. 4, people should have an equal say in how we live together. That's a democracy clause. We'll go for broke. 5, people should feel their lives are worthwhile. We must not destroy the planet. Okay? I don't hear any complaints. But if we all agree, why can't our communications help make these happen? Why the showbiz of collective conflict, the stasis, the hatred? Could it be intentional? Could continual obsessive pseudo disagreements suit the purposes of people with the power to influence the media? Perhaps because they don't want us to achieve a consensus of fairness and equality. Perhaps because our inequality is their privilege. Our powerlessness is their power.
Brilliant. And that is a wonderful place to finish. Thank you so much, Paul.
Thank you.
I've thoroughly enjoyed your book, and I'm sure that so many other people will enjoy it too. And we are going to set a competition question with the video when it goes out, for people to be able to win a copy. So there'll be 3 prizes, 3 books for 3 people to win. So the idea really is that people have to watch the video in order to answer the question, which is, you know, gives them a great opportunity to hear you speak. Thank you so much, and we'll speak again very soon. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you. Cheers.